I consider myself to be a normal teenager. I go to school and my favorite subjects are psychology and English. I am a part of a theater group where I serve on board and I participate in 4 shows a year. I am an artist and enjoy making artwork every single day. And throughout all these things I've done, there's still been a few set of memories that really stand out. 1, going to the doctors and being asked my family history. 2, walking down the street and hearing people say, oh, you're adopted, you're adopted, you're adopted. And then 3, being at different gatherings and being compared to my family and everyone, whether I look alike or act different, all those little things. Now, these stand out to me because I am adopted. Yes, I have blonde hair, blue eyes, and I'm from Georgia. Not the country, but Atlanta, Georgia. Adoption is not a race, gender, ethnicity, or culture. Every year, over 100,000 children are adopted by US families. So most likely you know someone who's adopted, and if not, now you know me. I have known that I was adopted for as long as I can remember. For a long time, though, it seemed more like a fantasy, and maybe that I was just some storybook character that was sent here to live a normal life. But as I got older, I understood where babies came from, and I realized, like everyone else, I had a biological mother and father. I wanted to know then my ethnicity, and I wanted to know my heritage, mostly just for bragging rights in front of my friends, because everyone focused so much on that in early elementary school. Now, as I continued with that, I started researching cultures. I began to read more and more, but I realized as much as I read, I would never truthfully know from just reading a page off of Wikipedia. So this grew into a fascination, an obsession, but I grew angry and frustrated that I couldn't figure out any of this. It started to control my life, and then a year ago that stopped. I started thinking, why was I letting this control me? I started sharing that I was adopted with all my friends, and I realized I knew a lot more people than I thought that were adopted. We had all gone through similar situations and had felt the same things, so why? And it came down to one thing: media. Throughout time, everyone has been obsessed with orphans and adoption. When you think about it, some of the most iconic characters throughout history were orphans or they're adopted. Hercules, Cinderella, Harry Potter, Oliver Twist, Annie, and Superman are just some examples. So throughout time, though, the view of adoption has changed. From the Roman times up to the Industrial Revolution, orphans were seen as just someone who had had a bad start to life, but they were good. They were cared for often by people of a higher education, or many times just scholars. They were brought up to believe in themselves and told that they were good. They were expected to succeed in life just like anyone else, and that there was nothing really limiting them. This reflected greatly in stories, with the children often just being portrayed as being innocent, naive, and good, and through their actions, and no matter what society said to them, they could succeed. However, when the Industrial Revolution came, that changed everything. With that, orphan children, instead of being cared for, were often put into workhouses, or in America, placed on orphan trains. A system of which US would strip the kids of their identities and ship them off to the West and Midwest, where they're lined on a platform and chosen of which ones they wanted. These children were looked down as the low rungs of society and an object, not someone to care about, but rather to use as a tool to profit off of. They were depicted as demented, and through the only way they could become good was not through their own morals, and they were just seen as bad. And the only way they could get out of that was through wealth and status, artificial values that somehow had become a big part of society. Now, even modern days, adoption is still portrayed everywhere. Horror movies often profit off of it greatly. In the movie Orphan, they portray a girl being adopted by a family, and then the girl goes on a killing spree of the family. So, this makes someone who's adopted look demented and like they're trying to hurt everyone, and that the family is sacrificing themselves for this child. Well, that is not exactly the case. Even in news articles, you rarely hear the term adopted person wins scholarship in competition and goes to Harvard. Instead, you hear adopted person suspect in murder. Well, that term adopted doesn't necessarily mean they did any of those things because they're adopted. It's just thrown in there to catch people's attention. Sadly, that greatly hurts the people who are adopted. Even movies such as The Avengers have used terms about adoption that have greatly offended people. In The Avengers, there's a line when Thor said, "Well, he is of Asgard and he is my brother," when referring to Loki, the villain. The Black Widow replied, "Well, he killed 80 people in the past 2 days," and Thor responded, "He's adopted." Well, How do you think this makes someone who's adopted feel? It puts us in an awkward situation, and by having media continuously saying these things is only making it seem more acceptable and completely normal and the truth, which is hurting everyone who's adopted. Even happy movies such as Elf portray Buddy as being naive, socially awkward, and of course he's adopted. Now, NBC wrote an article on the Avengers, and especially that quote. At the bottom, they had a poll. Only 4% of the people responded that they thought that that could offend someone. The rest of the 96% said that people were just overreacting. The fact that people thought that they were just overreacting hurt me more than the quote itself. They didn't understand how that could affect someone who's adopted. Now, it greatly does. There's a stigma on people who are adopted that they suffer from mental disorders, especially depression. They do not necessarily suffer from this just because they're adopted. And by saying these things, that is what's greatly affecting us more and causing us to have more mental health issues. So how do we change this? It starts with education. And every class I've taken, especially health classes, they've never once talked about adoption. Or if they have, it was more of just in the media rather than what adoption actually is. So one time in middle school, I was sitting with a group of girls. We're all talking about the future, and we're talking about, having children. One said, I want to adopt. I smiled and was going to say something, but then a girl said something else. She said, why would you want to adopt? They're all screw-ups and have problems. She did not know I was adopted. I often wonder if she would have known that, and if she would have maybe read actual articles on adoption rather than basing it off of the media, if she would have thought that and said that. So where do we go from here? Well, when I tell people I'm adopted, I get many different questions and reactions. The first one being either how or where are you from? So being adopted doesn't mean you have to be from another country. Only 14% of adoptions by US families are actually international. The rest are actually from domestic and adoptions from foster care. Last year, I was on a field trip with 2 other girls. I did not really know them well, and we were talking, and as we walked, we all realized we were adopted. However, we had completely different personalities and interests in life, and we're all very, very different in every single way. One was African American, one was Chinese, and there was myself. One was adopted through international adoption, the other through foster care, and myself through domestic. Right there, that was the perfect image of what adoption was. We're all different. There's not just one way you can say that is the adopted person. We're all unique, just like any other human. So then often I get asked, do you know your real family? I hate that term. What is a real family? Do you mean my adoptive family or my birth family? Both of them are real and exist. So there's a quote from the TV show The Fosters that says, DNA doesn't make a family, love does. I think that that's exactly how you should describe a family. Both my families have loved me. There's a stigma on birth parents that they gave up their child because of being just uneducated, they're unloving, they don't care, and they're inexperienced. That is not always true. Giving up your child is one of the most honorable things you can do. Being able to understand that your child can live a better life and be in a more supportive environment is one of the most honorable and loving things. And by realizing this, makes them some of the most smartest people in the world. My birth mom was 41 when she had me. There's a question on the adoption survey thing that I read that said, what subjects in school did you struggle with? And she wrote back, I was an honor student. I like to think she was arguing all those stereotypes that were placed on her by shows, especially like 16 and pregnant. So, even in your adoptive families, they're just as great. People say it's an easy way to get a child and that's the way you can do it if you just don't want to try. Well, that's kind of wrong. Adopting a child is a long process. They have to go through endless days, even years of interviews, paperwork, home studies, and then devastation before finally receiving a child. They are just as deserving, and like anyone else, we're like any other family. We fight, we get along, and we figure out things as we go. So then how else do people react? Well, there is always this way that people treat me. I'll be talking, have a normal conversation, and then I'll say, I'm adopted. And they look at me with this one expression like, some of you give your kids when you can tell they're lying and stole something. That look. They act like I can't be trusted or I'm lying, and then they say things. I've been called a reused child, a secondhand baby, and countless other things. These things are hurtful, and they're not true. People say these because they're not educated, or they're unaware how they affect us. Be aware, that's all I can say. One time in a class, I was handed a piece of homework, and the assignment was, interview your mom on going through pregnancy. Well, I faced a very awkward situation. So I could have either lied and made up some great story, or I could have done what I decided to do. I wrote down 3 words: I am adopted. There was other kids in that class that were adopted, and I wonder what they did. But the fact that this teacher was unaware that people could be adopted or hadn't even considered that possibility, that was very effective in my life and told me that there had to be a change. Don't use the phrase, maybe you're just adopted, because what does that imply? It implies that maybe you're different. And trust me, a lot of us, we're not that different. Yes, we're quirky sometimes, but we're all kind of quirky. So as I go with this, we all need to just accept it and be aware of everyone else. A child develops based on how they're raised, and by placing these stigmas and stereotypes on an adopted child is what's going to limit them. Adoption doesn't limit you. It provides a first chance at life, not a second, but a first. Babe Ruth, legendary baseball star, Kristen Chenoweth, Broadway extraordinaire, Edgar Allan Poe, American poet and writer, and Steve Jobs, co-founder of Apple, they are all adopted. Adopted doesn't limit you, it is a great thing. So let adopted child express themselves, explore it. Don't push them because they will want to know more when they can and when they feel comfortable. Let them understand it and embrace it. Encourage them that it's a positive thing and not a negative thing. And let them know that they are loved, that they are cared for, and that they're smart, intelligent, and beautiful. And let them think that maybe you're just adopted. That's not a negative thing. Teach them to ignore it. And if someone says that, it says anything, stand up for them. Educate those around you on adoption. Make sure they know what it is, and make sure that they don't say something that could offend someone. Being adopted has not limited me. Because I'm adopted, I've researched so many cultures that has helped me better understand the world and accept people for who they are. It has allowed me to understand my characters I portray in all my shows better, and has given me a chance to even express myself better through my artwork. And adoption has taught me a lot about myself and given me something to be proud of. It has taught me who I am, and it has given me an identity. I'm Rebecca Galler. I'm 17 years old. I'm a creative thinker, a dreamer, an artist, an actress, a sister, and a daughter, and I am adopted. Thank you.